One of the most famous events in medieval England was what transpired in Canterbury Cathedral on the 29th of December 1170. Inside the holy building, one of the most famous men and important figures across England was brutally slain inside his own cathedral. Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, was horrifically murdered inside the house of God by a number of knights. The intrigue around Becket's murder is who in fact was to blame for the death of the Archbishop, as there were a number who could be considered to have been responsible, with one even being the King of England at the time, Henry II. So join us today as we look at the brutal murder of Thomas Becket, and remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Thomas Becket is known today for being an incredibly important figure in medieval England, and it was during the reign of Henry II when he would rise to prominence. He was born around 1120 in Cheapside in London to a rather well-connected family. His father was a merchant, and his family were not too wealthy, neither too powerful. However, Becket was lucky enough to be sent to school, and also was even sent to Paris to study. Through his father's links, he managed to get Thomas a position in the household of Theobald of Bec, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Inside this position, Theobald trusted him to complete several missions to Rome, and also Thomas was sent to different European cities to study religious law. Becket became the Archdeacon of Canterbury and also picked up a number of different positions across England at the time. He was clearly a talented member of the clergy, and Theobald recommended him to King Henry II for the position as the Lord Chancellor, which had been vacant. In January 1155, Becket became the King's Lord Chancellor, and he was now one of the most powerful men in the country. Whilst performing this role, Becket and the King became very close and were very good friends, often being seen hunting and enjoying each other's company. They both were very rich at this point and would throw huge and lavish parties in incredible castles and royal lodgings, and Becket and the King became inseparable. It's clear that Becket also was enjoying the King's company and enjoying living the high life with the money from the treasury. Archbishop of Canterbury Theobald died in 1161, and the position was vacant and Becket's name was put forward. Although he was living the high life at lavish parties, he was seen as an unlikely candidate, but Henry II had big plans. With him placing his close friend in the job, Becket could continue as Chancellor, but also the King could become more powerful in the Church and exercise greater authority over the establishment. Thomas Becket became the Archbishop of Canterbury on the 23rd of May 1162 and was consecrated in early June. But at some point that year, against the King's wishes, he stepped down as the Chancellor. From this a dispute emerged, and Henry II and Thomas's relationship would never be the same again. A wedge was driven between the two, and their relationship began to break down. Previously they had been working hard on bringing new law and order to England, but with Becket becoming Archbishop, his whole personality and demeanour changed. He seemed to have undergone a religious conversion and shunned his previous life of partying, and seemed now a much more serious and devoted man. He turned from wearing expensive clothes to wearing a sackcloth shirt which reached his knees, and began to adopt a very scarce diet, drinking only water. A number of disputes occurred between Becket and the King, and by 1164 their tension was at a high, with Becket summoned to appear in autumn before the King's council. Here he was told to forfeit his personal property and lands, but refused to accept this, and fearing for his life he ran off to France. Becket stayed there in exile for 6 years, whilst the King maintained control. He defied his former friend the King by refusing to crown the heir apparent, and with this the Archbishop of York performed the duties, angering Becket. Becket therefore excommunicated those who had been involved with this, including a number of other bishops. Following this, the King opened up discourse again with Becket and promised to restore his former rights as Archbishop of Canterbury. But because he punished those involved in the unauthorised coronation, Henry was furious. Upon returning to England, this would cause chaos for Thomas Becket. Becket returned from exile in France on the 1st of December 1170, and he was allegedly greeted by cheering and ecstatic crowds, which featured much of the public, including monks. But the scene was different with the King, who was very angry with his former best friend. The excommunicated bishops travelled to see the King, and told Henry II of Becket's actions, and at this the King was even more furious. Now this is where things shifted greatly. At some point it's clear that Henry, upon hearing this news, flew into a blind fit of rage and may have ordered retribution or violence against Becket. The famous words uttered by the king were allegedly, "Will no one rid me of this troublesome priest?" With this, 4 of Henry's knights, who may have not been the brightest people at the royal court, decided to take this statement incredibly literally. The 4 knights, Reginald Fitzurse, William de Tracy, Richard le Bray, and Hugh de Morville, all rode out of Canterbury to confront Thomas Becket, and inside of Canterbury Cathedral they would come across their target, who they probably believed the king wanted dead. They reached Canterbury on the 29th of December 1170, and genuinely believed they'd been sent on a royal mission to assassinate Becket. Fortunately, we have a number of accounts as to what happened when they reached the cathedral, which is rare for an event in the medieval period, which took place around 9 centuries ago. One key account was written by a monk named Edward Grimm, who himself during the skirmish involving the knights was even injured himself. It's clear that the knights reached the town looking for Thomas Becket, who was in the Archbishop's palace, and after an attempt to arrest him in which he refused, Becket was persuaded by the monks to go to the cathedral to claim sanctuary and refuge. He was chased by the knights, who then burst into the cathedral. Thomas Becket was ordered to go to Winchester to give an account of what he had done. However, when he refused, the knights retrieved their weapons, which they had left outside. The monks then tried to hide for their own safety, and Becket addressed the knights saying, "It is not right to make a fortress out of a house of prayer." The knights shouted, "Where is Thomas Becket, traitor to the king and the kingdom?" With their swords drawn, the knights found Becket near to a door to the monastic cloister and the stairs leading into the crypt. When seeing the knights, Becket proclaimed, "I am no traitor, and I am ready to die." Becket held on tightly to one of the pillars inside the cathedral to prevent the knights from seizing him, and at this point, one of the knights raised his sword for the first blow, smashing it down onto the Archbishop of Canterbury, slicing off the crown of his head. A contemporary account states the impious knight suddenly set upon him and shaved off the summit of his crown, which the sacred chrism consecrated to God. Then with another blow received on the head, he remained firm. But with the third, the stricken martyr bent his knees and elbows, offering himself as a living sacrifice, saying in a low voice, "For the name of Jesus and the protection of the church, I am ready to embrace death." But the third knight inflicted a grave wound on the fallen one. With this blow his crown, which was large, separated from his head, so that the blood turned white from the brain, yet no less did the brain turn red from the blood. It purpled the appearance of the church. The fifth, not a knight but a cleric who had entered with the knights, placed his foot on the neck of the holy priest and precious martyr, and it is horrible to say, but scattered the brains with the blood across the floor, exclaiming to the rest, "We can leave this place, knights." He would not get up. So with a number of blows from the swords of the knights, the murder of Thomas Becket was complete. The blows were so vicious that it smashed open the skull of the Archbishop and caused his brain matter to be scattered across the floor of his own cathedral. It took 3 blows to bring the Archbishop's life to a brutal and savage end, and there were also a number of monks who were injured in the scuffle, attempting to protect their holy man. The impact of Becket's death was felt all across England. When Henry II heard of the news that the knights had acted upon his words and murdered his former best friend, the king was horrified and disgusted at the actions. The body of Becket remained there for several hours, with visitors dipping their clothes in his blood to preserve the relic of a man who would soon become a saint. He was then buried the next day by the monks in the crypt, and soon after reports of miracles were occurring at Becket's tomb. The monks opened the crypt to allow pilgrims to go and visit, and a huge amount of miracles were recorded. Within just a matter of years, the Pope had canonised Becket, and his reputation spread across Europe, and his tomb remained a place where miracles were believed to have taken place. Henry II, for his involvement in a huge act of penance in public, visited the tomb and granted approval to Becket's cult. Henry also wore a sackcloth to apologise to God for his words, and even allegedly starved himself for days before he allowed monks to whip him for his penance. Becket's shrine remained one of the most visited pilgrimage sites throughout the centuries, until it was destroyed by Henry VIII's agents during the dissolutions of the monasteries. Thomas Becket today remains an important figure in religion and in England, However, his murder and death is a clear reminder of how words can have severe consequences. The brutality that met the Archbishop that night in December 1170 inside his own house of God secured his place in history as a martyr and as a man who was cut down in horrific fashion. Whether the king actually ordered the death of Becket is debatable, but his story is one in English history which is incredibly important. It's clear that Becket, when made Archbishop, changed his life to fit closer to what the church wanted, and although this being extremely noble, it's something which greatly upset the king, and possibly it's here where we consider that Henry II really lost a friend he was so very close to. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.